place within the framework of a larger project on governing just socio-technical transitions, the quest for fairness, responsibility and sustainability, coordinated by Professor Stathis Arapostathis. And the main aim of this project is to identify and analyze critical factors and dimensions conditioning the potential to achieve just agri-food transitions. So I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker for today, Professor Stella Tsani, from the Department of Economics of our university, the National Kapodistrian University of Athens, who, among other achievements, is an invited lead author of the 7th Global Environmental Outlook, the UN Environmental Programme flagship environmental assessment. So Professor Tsani will talk today about climate action, energy transition, and labor markets, public policies and sectoral implications of just transitions. Well, Professor Tsani, dear Stella, I would like to warmly thank you for accepting our invitation to join us today and for supporting the Go Just seminars. Well, the UN 2030 Agenda to Environmental, Social and Economic Targets, goals such as access to affordable energy, climate action, decent work, and economic growth. So meeting climate targets, as well as the nationally determined contributions of the 196 state parties to the Paris Climate Agreement, and also the landmark regional roadmaps like the European Green Deal will have profound effects on core economic sectors and on the labor markets. So how these changes will impact our countries, regions, local communities, gender, and skills in the labor market? What policy responses are needed to meet the challenges of the just climate transition so that no one will be left behind in a world of increasing polarization and competition? The floor is yours, without any further ado.
Thank you very much, Manuela. It is me who has to thank both you and Stathis for making me part of this very, very interesting project and activities that the family of the Go Just and the UNESCO Chair is leading and is being engaged in. I'm very happy to be here and to hopefully to offer some of my economics perspectives, contributions to what you are doing from different disciplines, whether philosophy or political sciences. Thank you all thank you to the participants in this seminar. I know it's relatively late, probably you are coming after classes, after work, so when I developed the content of this seminar, I had in mind, first of all, the multidisciplinary approach of the Go Just seminar and the seminar series, and also the different disciplines that may be in the audience. So my presentation, and I'll share my screen while I'll brief you in the presentation. Just give me a confirmation that you see my screen and you see it full mode. Is that okay?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you. So when I was preparing this presentation, I was keeping in mind the multidisciplinary approach of the project and potentially the different disciplines that will be in the audience, and at the same time the many different keywords and aspects that I intentionally included in the title of today's presentation. What I will try to do is to fit in 30 minutes discussion aspects of climate change, energy transition, policies, and the concept of just transition, but looking at it from different perspectives: technological, energy, climate, social, policy making perspectives. And the reason for doing so is to deliver to the audience this core idea and the core message that while we tend to examine climate change and action related to it, energy transition, or labor markets in isolation, they tend to relate very much, especially at these times where we are undergoing a profound technological transformation that is somehow pushed from policies and from the climate emergency. So sometimes this speed and sometimes these conflicting powers or powers coming from different sources play part in shaping what should be shaped in common and also at a fair pace. Okay, so I apologize in advance for introducing many different concepts in today's presentation, but the idea is basically to deliver this core message, how they interconnect and how in the end of the day they call for action at different levels, whether it has to do with climate change, whether it has to do with energy, with socioeconomics and labor markets. So where do we stand? According to the last year's synthesis report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are already at a place where the impacts of climate change and temperature rise in particular will be felt not only by the generations to come, but also by current generations. So all of us to a certain degree will experience very high impacts of climate change and temperature rise in particular. So it's not that we are talking about something that will come in the coming decades, but it's something that is happening here. And to make things worse, there are scientists and an increasing number of studies that shows that actually this existential crisis has already begun to take place. So potentially we are at the beginning of an extinction, a next big, great, another extinction event in the planetary and human, planetary mainly, history. So given the conditions, given where we are, and given that we know well what is the human impact on climate change, and the fact that, you know, changes that should happen normally over a long period of time are happening much faster, and actually this is what we are concerned with, that the change is taking place at a rate that does not allow us to adapt. So we see the changes and we don't have enough time to respond in a way that can maintain socioeconomic activities. What is the main driving force of this? Of course, is emissions, and emissions that are related to economic activities of our societies and our economies. And this apparently amounts to specific levels of CO2 emissions. So we have a budget, a carbon budget, and it seems that most of this carbon budget is already depleted. So now we are at a stage where we need to act fast, and we need to answer two questions. How to act, so what are the priority transitions that we should make, whether there is enough knowledge and money and capital to address the necessary changes, and how these changes indirectly relate to the well-being of the people, not only in terms of environmental quality, not only in terms of planetary health, but in terms of, you know, everyday life and access to decent living standards and decent income. Adding on the targets that we have that relate not only to climate change, but also to sustainability transition, and I include here a summary table of progress that countries and different regions around the world have done with regards to meeting the 17 Sustainable Development Targets of the United Nations Agenda to 2030. In this study, we try to see where the Mediterranean countries stand, and we compare these to large group of countries, whether developed, developing, OECD countries, or sub-Saharan low-income countries. Of course, the image is not very good, and of course we see what we would expect anyway, that low-income countries, developing countries have a great deal of progress to make in meeting the targets, but also what is most worrisome is that developed countries, strong economies, still lag behind in terms of meeting these targets by 2030. And just a reminder that we are halfway there, so it's less than 7 years left. It's 6 now, and it's going to be 5 years next year. So we are almost near the end, the finishing line, and still we have a lot of progress and road to cover. And what is mostly alarming in this is that when we focus in the case of energy transition and the readiness of the system, whether technological, economic and social systems to meet the energy transition, so to transit from conventional energy sources to renewable energy sources and green alternatives, we see that even the best performers, even those countries that have made great advancements in the energy transition, like Sweden and Norway, you see here, for instance, the Transition Readiness Index of the World Economic Forum. So you see that even those countries that excel in making the necessary changes, they still are 2/3 in that road that they need to cover. So again, they have ahead of them the 1/3 of the road to cover. And what is most worrisome in this is that even the good performers have ahead of them the most difficult parts of transition to meet, whether technological or social. Imagine how this discussion changes when we talk about developed countries or about developing countries or low-income countries or regions around the world that have to catch up not only with energy transition imperatives, but also with the technological innovation that should take place to meet energy transition targets. So from these 3 slides, what I want to deliver as a key message is that we are living a climate change crisis, an existential crisis for the humanity. We need to act relatively fast. We have eaten most of the budget that we have at reach, whether environmental or emission budget. We have done some decent progress at regional and global level, but yet the most difficult part is ahead of us. And this difficult part has to be covered in a relatively short period of time. So how do we respond to these emergencies and what has been the approach so far? The approach has been that we put in place, and especially in the European Union, different policies that are trying to provide the regulatory background that will accelerate this transition, and also it shows the direction and the end target at the European Union level. So in that regard, the European Union has been very proactive when it comes to climate change, when it comes to energy transition, when it comes to sustainability transition. It has been a front runner in implementing innovative approaches and in supporting technologies that can help us with decarbonization and climate change targets. You may be aware of the European Green Deal, of the REPowerEU strategy, and the carbon neutrality target that Europe has set for 2050. In reality, the target is much sooner than that. It's in 2040, but most of the discussion evolves about around 2050. This is the good news, that, okay, we have policy frameworks that are in place and are trying to catalyze the sustainability and energy transition and climate change action. But if we look at the success of former initiatives, or even if we go back and look at the success of the global dialogue and the global coordinated actions, there is not much that in the end of the day leaves us with optimistic views about how the future is going to be and whether we will be there. Anyway, even if we assume that these things will be implemented and the transition is taking place, there are still things that we need to consider. And usually these challenges and these aspects that we need to consider in more detail have to do with the coordination between policymakers, the society, and the business sector. And of course, the fourth pillar that is very important for the transitions, that is the financial world. When we talk about the interaction of these 4 different stakeholders, we also need to consider the differentials that we have between resource exporters, consider, for instance, traditional oil and gas exporters, and developed countries that want to move away from traditional fuels. And this initiative has to do not only with climate change targets, but also has to do with energy security, with diversification of resources, and with other geopolitical considerations. Of course, this is not the image for all the countries around the globe. There are other countries that are still at that stage where energy consumption and increase in energy consumption is very important for their economic development. And these countries rely very much on existing mature technologies, not just because they want to do so, but because they have also financial constraints to adopt new technologies. And of course, they have knowledge constraints. Consider, for instance, Sub-Saharan Africa or oil-producing countries in Central Asia or in Africa. They have access to relatively cheap, abundant, and of high productivity energy resources on one side, and on the other side, they have committed to specific climate and energy transition targets for which they have to pay and to mobilize significant financial amounts. So they are faced with what we call a carbon lock-in risk. So whether they like it or not, they may continue on the same path of dependence on conventional energy sources, but that means that may have access now to cheap energy resources, but this will keep them in a technology and energy consumption track that increases their future discrepancy from developed economies on one side. And on the other side, we have the same problem of carbon lock-in for developed countries or countries that have been very forward-looking with regards to moving away from oil and gas. And this has to do with what kind of sectors and what kind of investments and technological adoption takes place in these countries. And I'll explain more in a bit. So let me give you an example. We have you hear a lot nowadays about investments in renewable energy technologies, about innovations that we have with regards to alternative fuels. Consider, for instance, hydrogen. Consider even the development or the revived interest in nuclear energy. I'm not discussing here whether it's green or not, or renewable or not, but it's definitely cleaner in terms of emissions. So we see that there's a lot of investment and interest in exploiting and developing alternative technologies and sources, but when it comes to bringing these into the grid and bringing them close to the final consumer, the picture is a bit discouraging. Why? Because we see lack of investments and willingness from investors to invest in what is very important for the energy transition, and that is infrastructure and grid. Okay, so we see a lot of interest in power sector investments that tend to move away power generation and electricity generation away from oil and gas. But then we see little investments in what we call hard to abide sectors, so sectors that are very difficult to decarbonize because they have high technology cost, high investment costs to decarbonize. So one thing is this, that we continue focusing on specific sectors, especially the power sector, and we don't invest in what is needed to complement these innovations in the power sector. Grids one, energy efficiency the second. One thing that we are concerned with in energy production and in regards to cleaner energy production is the source of electricity. The other has to do with the use of the electricity. So not enough has been done in terms of improving energy efficiency. Of course, Europe, where we belong to, is not the case because we see a lot of initiatives to improve energy efficiency, and apparently we don't expect significant energy efficiency improvements to happen in the developed part of the world because these countries have already done most of the bit that they can do in order to reduce energy consumption. But we don't see enough investments in energy efficiency improvements in the developing part of the world. Why we don't see that? We don't see it because it's very difficult to monetize the financial returns from investments in energy efficiency. For instance, if you have a retrofit project in a factory or in a house, how can you tell how much you earn from that and what is the return on that investment? So since we have this black box with regards to returns in energy efficiency projects, we see that we don't have enough capital flow being directed there, and this is even larger in terms of presence and importance for the developing countries. Grid and infrastructure, I already mentioned this, but what I want to add here is that if we want to address climate change and energy transition imperatives at the global level, and I talk about global level because this is not a regional challenge, it's a global challenge, and we need coordinated action at the global level, then it means that we should develop alternative technologies, alternative sources at the global level, and also make sure that all these alternative energy production is available around the globe. In order to do that, you need grid and infrastructure investments that connect together different parts of the world with different capacities to produce clean energy and different consumption needs. Consider, for instance, Sahara, or consider deserted areas where can be excellent places to put solar panels, but these are usually away from urban centers that that are in need of considerable electricity consumption needs. Or consider, for instance, the increase in demand, in energy demand that is coming from developing countries, India and China in particular, and the importance to connect these countries with other countries and other regions that can provide clean energy. So we understand that we need here a lot of grid and infrastructure upgrade, for which there is not enough private interest to engage in. So this calls for another thing and highlights another problem in this climate change action that is related particularly to clean energy production, that has to do with the engagement of the public sector and the development of partnerships between the private and the public sector to mobilize investments not just in power generation, but also in grid and energy-related infrastructure. Now, I referred in the beginning to the importance of the developing countries. And probably in the part of the world where we are, Europe, we don't really discuss this every day, or we haven't grasped in full the importance of the developing part of the world in the future energy consumption growth. And of course, in terms of energy efficiency improvements. As I said earlier, the developed part of the world already has covered its bit and has done its bit in terms of reducing energy demand. We have introduced energy efficiency improvements. We are able to buy technologies that come with energy savings. But this is not the case for the developing part of the world. If you see in these charts, you see that most of the expected increase in primary energy demand is coming from developing countries. India, China, but also other parts of the world, Central Asia, OPEC countries are expected to drive this growth in energy demand, in primary energy demand. So we understand that it's not enough to take action in the developed part of the world, but we need to have a closer look in the developing part of the world. But this developing part of the world, as already mentioned, has already access to polluting primary energy resources, oil and gas. So it's a question here, what do we give to these countries to not opt for the most polluting option and to make this energy transition? Do we provide them with technology? Do we provide them with enough capital to make investments or not? And actually, this is something that is going to be intensively discussed in the forthcoming COP29 next month in Baku, Azerbaijan, because one of the things that left unfinished in the last COP was exactly this. How do we support financially the developed part of the world to make the energy transition on time and to make in general the sustainability transition on time? So this adds another dimension to what we call just transition, okay? Because usually in Europe, when we talk about just, and especially in Greece, we have in our minds only jobs, like how many people are impacted by job losses and destruction of some sector, and how many people are benefiting from the emergence of new sectors of production. Now, another thing that has to do with the concept of just transition, and especially if we look at the development of renewable energy sources, if we look at right now what is really needed to develop clean energy technologies, we see that there is a huge concentration of primary materials, raw materials, whether copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium, in some developing countries, and with the exception of Australia, most of them are faced with significant transition challenges. Think, for instance, China, think Chile, Indonesia, Russia, and their dependence on conventional fuel exports. And of course, if we look at the manufacturing of the technologies that are used for renewable energy technology, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it's electric vehicles, we see that most of this manufacturing takes place in China. So another thing here that emerges and deserves special attention is the concept of just transition that has to do with the creation of new opportunities, employment and technological and innovation opportunities around the globe. So whether Europe or US can be a front runner in this technological innovation, and whether this innovation in the end of the day translates to jobs in these parts of the world. And the second thing has to do with security of supply. So how much regions like Europe that are front runners in clean energy technologies can indeed secure the supply of the necessary materials or the manufactured parts that are important for this energy transition. And now let me focus and connect this energy and just transition concepts particularly with labor markets. It's well understood that now that we are undergo this fourth technological innovation stage, and now that we undergo this transition, some sectors will be negatively impacted, and other sectors, other technologies, other production activities will see their value being increased in the years to come. So that means that some segments of the labor market may be negatively affected and others may be positively affected. Of course, the future generations should not face this as a challenge, because they will have the time ahead and they will be given the indication, what kind of skills to develop, where to look for jobs, or what would be the best option for them in the years to come. The issue and the main problem is related to those that are impacted here and now, today, and especially if we talk about older generations and mature people in the labor markets first, and second, those that now are making the decision on the skills that they should develop in order to find a job in the years to come. So this relates not only to the speed at which changes are taking place, but also at the policies that are put in place ahead of the issue rising. And I'm linking this to policies because so far we have talked about policies that relate to energy transition, to energy security. But these policies may create issues in other aspects, in other economic aspects, like for instance employment and income generation, if they don't come together with policies that target specifically the labor market or the education system that prepares people for what the industry and the economy would require in the years to come. Here, for instance, we have a map on the regional needs and the disparities in the share of green and non-green task jobs in Greece. So you see that those regions that are very much dependent in lignite and energy production show a large percentage of people with what we call non-green, or let's say polluting jobs. But at the same time, these are the regions that will be in most of need for green skills, because here is where we see programs that are trying to support the transition, the just transition of these regions, and programs that are trying to develop alternatives of production and economic development in those regions. But what we also see is that sometimes the necessary skills, especially the green skills, are not located always in places where are most in need. So this tells us something, signals, rings a bell about those interventions that are necessary so as to relocate skills, and also to prepare on time the skill availability in those places that will be most in need. And if you extend this map and we take it beyond Greece, someone may think like what will be the future needs and the immediate future needs with regards to green skills in developing parts of the world. If we don't have timely interventions there with regards to skills development and training and redirection of the curricula towards green skills, then we will be found with a significant gap in terms of skills availability in the labor markets on one side, and on the other side we will see in these countries a large share of the labor force being equipped with the non-needed skills. So there is a dual issue here of how you maintain the living standards of those people that are not a good fit, and at the same time how you prepare the next generation of the labor force that will feed with the necessary skills, the projects that will take place. Now, extending the discussion to the training, to the necessary skills, to just transition, something that has to be made clear is that the concept of green skills and the need for education and reskilling and upskilling is not found on those traditional sectors that we usually consider. So it's not just energy production, it's not just renewable energy technologies that will be in need of these new skills. We can see that through updates that we have in accounting systems, in reporting systems, through innovation, through technological upgrades, through the development of the digital technologies, we see that more and more skills and updates in those skills are needed in low-skilled works, in medium-skilled jobs, and in high-skilled jobs. And of course, these may come at various degrees of integration. So you may have jobs where it require a very deep integration of green skills, and on the other hand, you may have some jobs, for instance, consider plumbers, where they need some degree, some level of understanding of what green is and what sustainable practice is and how this can be implemented in their work. Not to mention, when we talk about energy transition and when we talk about climate change action and deployment of renewable energy technologies, is that we may see some of the required skills needed, but we don't have the full image yet on what kind of training or what kind of needs we will have in the labor markets in the years to come. Why? Simply because some of these technologies have not yet come to the end of their economic lifetime, or simply because some of them are not fully matured yet. Consider, for instance, hydrogen, or consider the end of the economic lifetime of wind, of the blades in the wind turbines. So now it's emerging this problem, this issue of how do we recycle them, how do we extend their lifetime, how do we use them in a circular manner. And now it seems that it emerges this necessity to identify what kind of skills, what kind of expertise, what kind of thinking and design skills we need in order to address these questions. So if we can extract one key takeaway message here, is that whoever is trying to address this question of what are the necessary skills and how do you train and retrain and you redirect people to choices and options and sectors where they can make a living, one has to consider the fact that we are undergoing a technological transformation, and this has not given us the full image yet of what is going to be required in the years to come. Not to mention here the technology and technological innovation and digitalization and the impact that it has in terms of not only the skills that are required to make these digital technologies a useful tool, but also to make sure that this digitalization does not subsidize for human labor force, but it's just a tool that improves the productivity of people. But having said that, that also indicates into a new requirement that now the labor force and the skills that we're giving to the people entering the labor market have not much to do with implementing knowledge, but have to do with combining knowledge and being able to identify new problems and how to address these problems. So it seems that the key question now and the key skill that is needed in the labor market is to develop employees that can identify, can name the problem, and then be able to structure the steps to address these problems. And of course, in this case is climate change mitigation and adaptation. So if we understand by now that we have a real problem to address, and that is timely climate action, energy transition in this particular example in this presentation, then it means that we need to reconsider the policies that we are using in order to prepare the labor market and the human, the labor force for these transformations. The last decades have been characterized, especially in the developed, in OECD countries, have been characterized by low interventions in the labor markets, okay, and low interventions, regulatory interventions in general in the in the economic activity. In the developing part of the world, what we have seen, and especially in resource exporting countries, is this concept of local content. So the concept is goes as follows, that we develop those policies and those approaches to industrial production that increase the possibility to create value added from local labor force and from local suppliers. And the idea was very simple, that international oil companies or international mining companies, international investors come with very well-established supply chains. So if host countries do not make them somehow to utilize local content, they cannot benefit in full from the ability to generate value within the economy. So capital intensity on one side, low forward and backward links of the energy sector with the rest of the economy have given rise to what is called local content policies. Now, there's a lot of discussion about local content policies, whether they are useful, whether they contribute to the economic development, or whether they act as bottlenecks in economic activity. Because when these kind of local content policies are implemented in cases where the local capacity is not well developed or is not adequate to supply the projects, then it can create bottleneck issues. However, since the development of renewable energy technologies in developed countries, we have seen a revitalization of the interest on these local content policies. Actually, what we have seen countries like Spain, France, even the UK or the US, to use this concept of local content in order to support the development of renewable energy technologies and related local sectors. So the idea has been pretty much the same. How do we give incentives to investments or to projects in the energy sector to use as much as possible local capacity, whether in terms of labor force or in terms of the local suppliers, local technology, and local innovation. In a recent study that we completed together with Chrysula Hitu, we examined these local content policies through a renowned, through an updated, let's say, lens. And the lens is the lens of the SDGs. So the idea was that let's try and learn from the past, see how these policies have been used, see what the issues have been with local content policies, and let's see whether these local content policies can be developed keeping in mind the sustainability transition targets. And what we find is that indeed local content policies, if appropriately implemented, come with benefits or come with real positive impacts that have to do with industrial development, with employment generation, with stimulation of R&D, or even the knowledge transfer between the foreign investors and the local communities. However, at the same time, we saw from the literature review and from the analysis of case studies that also local content policies, if not appropriately designed, or if they don't consider the limitations in the local economy, they can downgrade the competitive stance of the local economy. They may induce corruption issues, or they may even retard the deployment of projects, particularly in the energy sector, simply because the local capacity is not enough to cater in terms of employment or in terms of technology or in terms of skills and innovation necessary to make this energy transition. So what we do is we take a step further to this local content approach, and what we propose to policymakers is the following. Why not use local content policies under the updated lens of SDG targets? So instead of trying to create direct links between on the investments in the energy sector between the foreign investors and the particular sector in the country, try to use foreign capital, foreign technology, foreign know-how to develop skills, to develop technology, to develop good practices that may find application, not necessarily in the energy sector, but in other sectors, in other productive sectors. Let me give you an example. If someone is trying to develop an energy project in Greece, and this actually is a very good case in Greece, for instance, right now in Greece, we have we have two main policy intentions that run in parallel. The first is to exploit, to find whether there is any underground conventional energy source, and this has been the focus of exploration activities in Epirus and in south of Crete. And at the same time, we have a new national program and aspiration to exploit the offshore wind energy potential of the country. Okay, now in both these cases, those that will develop the projects and those that can run the tests are large foreign investors. We have large oil companies, American oil companies in the oil and gas sector. We have Norwegian companies that have expressed interest in offshore wind potential in Greece, and they both are coming with very well established supply chains. And apparently we don't have enough time to develop this know-how, to develop the technology, to develop the tools at the national level. But what can be done, and especially if this approach, this SDG-based approach that we propose is used, is to engage these foreign investors in projects, in innovation activities, and in investments, not necessarily in the primary sector where they engage, so not necessarily in the oil and gas extraction or in the offshore wind production, but it can be, for instance, the financing of a project in the circular economy model in the agricultural sector. So, for instance, they can allocate funding to see how water use can be minimized in the agricultural sector or in specific industries in Greece. Or an additional thing could be to use this foreign know-how or the foreign capital that is running for the development of green skills in the labor market that do not necessarily find application in the energy sector alone. For instance, projects that develop with regards to offshore wind energy production can support the training of new professionals in large data management, in remote sensing and monitoring, and these kind of activities can find application in other economic activities in Greece. Consider, for instance, tourism, consider marine transport, consider recreational activities, consider even biodiversity and marine environmental protection. So the idea that we propose is to map each and every one of the different SDGs with the policy priorities that can be put in place with industrial and training. Sorry, it's getting late and I'm getting tired, so sorry for that. With the training and education activities. And to conclude, when we discuss about policy interventions and policy recommendations, all these this concept of just transition is pretty much related to the time and to the spatial dimension of transition. So that means that we need to plan today for what the labor force is going to see tomorrow, and we need to plan today and ahead for those regions that will be impacted but don't know yet the impact. So yes, of course, we propose the integration of local content policies within the larger national development practices, but this has to come in a timely manner, and of course it has to come by identifying those priority sectors where interventions should be made. Not to mention that higher education, training, vocational training should be a prime priority for policymakers, because there is where the next generation of employees is being trained for. And of course, what is required is to not just to integrate, but also to coordinate actions at regional level, at industry level, with actions at national level. So it doesn't really matter what is happening in a particular project that has to do with offshore wind development or with oil and gas exploration, but it's much more important how this particular project links to the specific region where it's taking place, and also how it links to the greater national development policies. And I could go on and propose more, but I think I should respect the time limit, although I did not respect it too much as I see the time now. So apologies for that. Hopefully it was interesting, and I'm waiting forward for questions, comments, discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, in such a short time, you presented the current situation, you conceptualized the core concepts, and also highlighted the main challenges ahead while presenting a wide range of realistic and feasible solutions. So we do have some time for discussion. So I open the floor for questions. You can raise your hand. There is the bar down there, and you can raise your hand. So who is going to start?
I can see Helios.
Yes, that's me.
Please, go ahead.
I had a question during all this seminar. Thank you very much. I should say first. So I had a question. What if some, especially developing countries, are not interested at all in participating in green transition? That was my question.
Thank you. I think this is why I referred to this carbon lock-in. This is why I included that slide, because I don't think there's an option not to be interested for two main reasons. The first is existential. If you don't act, you run the danger of facing extreme events, extreme changes in the economy, in the environment. So you have to act as a country. And the second is that if you are not interested in this, you are losing the train, the innovation train, and the next socio-economic environmental model that is being developed. And I don't think that is an option for any country, developed or developing. Because I think that in the end of the day, any country is just a node in this system. We live in an interconnected world in terms of trade, in terms of technology, in terms of human transport, goods and services exchange. So if they are not interested in this, that means that they are losing a big part of the innovation, of the technological change that is taking place, of the social change that is taking place. And of course, not to mention the impacts of climate change that they will be faced with.
So, may I do a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I had in mind countries that either are in denial. For example, Trump administration pulled out from the Paris deal, and countries that are in regional wars that have been going on for decades. For example, Israel and Palestine. So these countries don't seem, at least if Trump wins again, for example, don't seem to have very good prospects.
Yeah, I would agree with you that if Trump is going to be re-elected, probably we will see some serious setbacks when it comes to climate change action and sustainability transition. For me, it's not a matter of denial that is that important, because we still have the tools and the means and the knowledge to deliver the image to non-experts. For me, the question is much more related to whether societies, communities, and people in the end of the day have the necessary means to transform. And I think this is much more important question to answer when it comes to developing countries and those countries that seem that they are not doing enough to meet climate change targets. The question is, can they do something about it? Do they have the means? Because in some parts of the world, making a living and just, going through the day is extremely tough. So they don't have the time. It's a luxury to discuss about the day after and, the week after what's going to happen. So this is a question that at least the developed part of the world needs to address, whether we provide them with enough knowledge, enough capital, enough incentives to engage, not because they don't want to engage, but because they cannot engage. They don't have enough means to engage in climate change action.
Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Emmanuella,
Stathis has raised his hand.
I have a question. Yes, thank you so much, Stella. That was a really insightful talk. I have two questions. One about the timely and the urgency. How this argument about urgency really can, let's say, trigger governance patterns that they are not based on deliberation, openness, transparency, and democracy, because exactly of this urgency. So things need to be done very quickly. So decisions need to be done thinking very quickly, while deliberation needs time. And the second question is because you mentioned something about global justice, whether the issue of the raw material and materials and the production modes of those raw materials for the new technology, like photovoltaics, like batteries, that we know that they are very harmful for the environment and the communities of the place where they are extracted and produced. What is happening in balancing this and integrating this in the analysis of justices and injustices?
Thank you, Stathis. Both of them very, very good questions. With regards to the first one, whether acting fast should come with discounts in good governance, democracy, transparency, etc. I need to make a distinction here between scientific knowledge and political willingness to take action. We know we need to act. Okay, and by we, I mean the scientific community has well documented that change is happening, it's happening fast, and if we don't take action, things will come to a point of no return. So we will pass tipping points. Luckily, the good news are that the same scientific community comes with solutions. Solutions are there. And also money is not an issue. There are several studies that say that we can finance the sustainability transition. We can finance climate change action. We can finance energy transition. So that is not the issue. What is the issue here is willingness to implement this. So when it comes to decision making, whether there is enough commitment and timely commitment to implement the change. Okay, so and when I said that solutions are there, these solutions are integrated. For instance, now that we are working on the G7 report, we talk about economic and financial system transformations. We don't talk only about technological innovation that can address water scarcity, for instance, or CO2 emissions. We also talk about the necessary governance changes that should take place in order to support this transition. And these governance changes explicitly consider the importance for inclusive, for participatory decision-making and for transparency. Okay, so good institutions are a prerequisite to have a timely, just a transition. So for me, the urge, or what I would urge the audience with, is the following. See how closely policymakers follow scientific advice. Okay, because this scientific advice does not come with a discount on the need for transparency, for inclusive governance, for the consideration of the needs of indigenous people, the local communities, those that are less favored. Okay, so I think there is not an issue there not to do this in the right way. Solutions are there, pathways are there, it's just a matter of willingness to implement. On the second question about resource availability and the pressure that is put on local communities, on developing countries to get access to these resources. Humanity has a very good stock of past experience on what happens when you find something somewhere that is precious and is important for the global economy. Consider, for instance, oil and gas, consider minerals, metals. So it's not something that we are doing for the first time. This time is lithium, this time is cobalt, but the approach to managing it or to extracting it should not be different than the optimal approach that we have proposed to be developed for oil and gas or for minerals and metals. We have, as humanity, we've done mistakes in the past, and the countries that have sat on these large nature's gifts, minerals and metals, have done mistakes, and we should learn from these mistakes. And now that we have this framework of sustainability transition, we can use it, and they can use it. Individual countries, investors can use it, local communities can use it, international financial institutions can use it, so as not to repeat the same mistakes that have been done in other parts of the world that exploited concentrated, but yet of the same nature, minerals and metals. Okay, so I think it is doable, as long as we don't repeat the same mistakes that we have done with other depletable resources that were vital for the global community in the past, the global economy, of course.
Oh, I have a final question.
Thank you very much, Stella.
I may. We still have a few minutes, I think.
Yes, Manuela, please.
Well, while you said that the developed world did its bit and some progress in the just transition pathway, well, I'll come back to Europe because there are a lot of issues, especially after the European Parliament elections, and some claim that the current direction and pace of the European Green Deal ignore harsh realities, such as, for instance, the need to protect Europe's industrial base. Is such criticism justified, and is it possible to do both? I mean, move towards decarbonization and just transition and have a thriving manufacture on the other hand? How can we deal with the trade-offs?
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, when I mentioned that the developed part of the world has done its bit, it was with regards to energy efficiency improvements alone. So I'm not saying that the developed part of the world has done enough with regards to just transition and energy transition in particular. Now, with regards to the trade-offs, there is a very good driving force on EU policies that look for energy transition and sustainability transition. And this has to do with energy security, diversification of sources, and the target to develop new sectors in the European continent. Okay, because Europe right now, what is faced with an aging population, is faced with an industry that is decreasing in value and is subject to increasing competition from the developing part of the world, especially China and India. And there is little we can do to play with them or to compete in terms of labor costs. So we can only compete in terms of innovation and technological advancement. Yet these countries are doing very well. If you look at the patents, if you look at the R&D expenditures in these countries, they are on the rise. So Europe is in a good position for now, but we need to be realistic for how long we can have this competitive edge. So Europe is trying to transform not just to meet environmental targets. Okay, it's trying to transform in order to have a day after for its economy and for its society. And we are dependent on developing these circular economy models, these saving models and resources, because that's the only way we can generate jobs, we can generate economic activity within the continent, and we can reduce our dependence on resources and imports from other regions, from other parts of the world. So I don't see really a trade-off, I see just an opportunity here that we need to exploit in full. Otherwise, as an economy, as a continent, we are facing serious challenges.
So I would like to thank you very much for this insightful presentation, as well as the discussion that followed. Many thanks to all of you for your participation. And I give back the floor to Stathis for a final word.
Thank you very much, Stella. Thank you, everybody, for being in this webinar, and look forward to see you in the next 2 seminars. Thank you so much. We are really grateful, Stella, for this excellent talk. Thank you, Emmanuella. Good night.
Thank you very much. The pleasure was all mine. Keep up the great work. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.